The Institute of Chartered Accountants of India is the world's second-largest accounting and auditing body. The Institute has proudly completed 70 years of providing excellence and has coined a new theme, celebrating the past, inspiring the future.
I would now like to call upon my colleague, CA John George, to take over the proceedings of the evening.
My name is John George. I am the leader, professional development of the Abu Dhabi chapter. Learning is a treasure that will follow its owner everywhere. During the past 12 months, we have conducted 17 regular professional development events with 47 CPE hours and more than 40 speakers presented during the event. Technical sessions during the International Annual Seminar is the king of all our professional development events. We are going to start the much awaited technical sessions. We have 7 technical sessions and many eminent speakers will be participating in this 30th International Annual Seminar. The first session is a panel discussion on the topic, Art of Diplomacy, Driving Nations' Progress. The panel discussion will be moderated by our own Ambassador of India to the United Arab Emirates, His Excellency Navdeep Singh Suri. It is with great pleasure and honor to invite His Excellency Navdeep Singh Suri to moderate the panel discussion. I kindly request His Excellency to be on the stage. We have 2 more eminent speakers to join the panel discussion. It is my pleasure and honor to invite His Excellency Arthur Sparrow, Ambassador of Australia to the United Arab Emirates. I kindly request His Excellency to join the panel discussion. I request C.A. Rajesh to play the introductory video of His Excellency Arthur Sparrow.
His Excellency Arthur Sparrow is the Ambassador of Australia to the United Arab Emirates. He is a career officer with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. He had served overseas previously as Counselor in the Australian High Commission in Malaysia and had an earlier posting in France. In Canberra, he has been Director of Sections responsible for management, conduct and corporate strategy, bilateral relations with Vietnam, Myanmar and Lagos, and also for Australia's engagement with the United Nations and Commonwealth. Mr. Sparrow holds a Master of Arts in Foreign Affairs and Trade from Monash University, a Bachelor of Arts Honours from Sydney University, and a Bachelor of Laws from Sydney and Utrecht Universities.
It is my pleasure and honor to invite Her Excellency Francisca Elizabeth Mendez Escobar, Ambassador of Mexico to the United Arab Emirates. I kindly request her to join the panel discussion. I request C.A. Rajesh to play the video of Ambassador Francisca.
Her Excellency Francisca Elizabeth Mendez Escobar is the Ambassador of Mexico to the United Arab Emirates. Ambassador Mendez entered the diplomatic service of the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1991. She graduated as a BSc in Political Sciences and Public Administration, MSc in Latin American Studies, and MSc in Law and Economics. In the Mexican Foreign Service Headquarters, Ambassador Mendez worked in the Department of Political Affairs and the Caribbean, in the Directorate for United Nations and in the Directorate for Global Affairs. She was a Deputy Consul in the consulates in Milan and Barcelona. Ambassador Mendez was Deputy Head of Mission in Romania, Costa Rica. In Spain, she was Charge d'Affaires. She also acted as Deputy Head of Mission for European Union, Kingdom of Belgium, and Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. Ambassador Mendes has represented Mexico in over 40 meetings in multilateral and regional forums. She was a speaker in various conferences on Mexican foreign policy. She's an author and has also published numerous articles.
Thank you, ambassadors. We are looking forward to hear the art of diplomacy. Thank you. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to start off by welcoming my colleagues, Arthur and Francisca, and also to claim full responsibility for whatever you're going to endure for the next 45 minutes. The reason is that I did take the liberty of suggesting to the ICAI Abu Dhabi chapter that why not widen our conversations a little bit, both for you to get a different perspective from other countries and also for our diplomatic colleagues to get a sense of your thinking and perhaps to get to know you a little bit better. The beautiful thing about this conversation is that they have not the foggiest idea what I'm going to say. And I gave them no clue, but being seasoned diplomats, I do know that they can handle anything. But just to get this started off, because yours is a community that largely represents businesses, I thought that we could narrow down the art of diplomacy, which is a very broad subject, to the art of economic diplomacy. And to start off with a little bit, maybe 2 or 3 minutes from each of you on how do you see the relationship between your country and UAE, particularly in terms of trade, investment, energy, commerce, expatriates, some of those things that we work on for a living, which are bread and butter issues for all of us. And then go perhaps to the next level of what we do in practical terms in some of these areas. So Francisca, over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for the invitation. I'm very surprised how the Indian community is very well integrated in the UAE. You are in all the levels of this wonderful country, and you are part of history of this country. So for me, this kind of events are very important in my personal relation and in my understanding of this country. And that's why I accept, very glad to be here. Congratulations for this first annual meeting of ECI, because it's a very good representation of India, as you say in your speech. And the motive also for this meeting, people, purpose, passion, is lovely. It's the 3 P's important for the development of this country. I have to be very honest with you. I really don't have any idea of which kind of question and we have kind of speech I have to develop, but I know I understand very well. In fact, I asked my colleague Australia what kind of a speech I can have here, but no, it's the answer. It's relative easily, because the personal approach of the diplomacy, it's the only reason that my colleague Australia and my colleague myself are here. Because no matter the innovation of technology, of communication, the human being and the presence of the personal relation is our most beautiful and wonderful value. And if you transfer the personal relation into the economy, bilateral relation between the specific Mexico and the UAE, especially in this country, is great. Because Mexican and Emirati people have the same way to doing business. I mean, you have to be very confident first. You have to be very personal relation with the businessman, and then you can do in business. There are another models, for example, the Anglo-Saxon models, or even the United States model is the opposite. But the Mexican and the Emirati people, they doing business first for the confidence. And in this sense, the personal relation is fundamental. So this is my first answer, and then we will try another issues. Thank you.
Namaste. Good to see everyone.
You have to establish, first and foremost,
the planks, the architecture for the countries to be able to discuss amongst themselves and create a platform for everyone else. These are very basic comments, I think, and we can talk about the tradecraft of economic diplomacy as we go on.
I think Arthur makes a really good point that we kind of have to adapt and to reinvent ourselves each time we move, depending on the conditions in the country in which we are. And going back to my last assignment in Australia, where it was very much like business to business and government as a minor role as a facilitator, whereas here we find ourselves doing 2 or 3 different things. When it comes to trade, I must say that I claim minimal responsibility or credit for the fact that UAE is our 3rd largest trading partner, or our exports last year were $32 billion. It's our 2nd largest market for exports. But a lot of that happens entirely in the business domain. We step in where we find some unreasonable barriers to entry. It could be something related to pharmaceuticals, it could be something related to Indian mangoes, it could be something related to poultry, and each of these are cases that we as an embassy then take up with the relevant local authorities to make sure that those barriers are not there. Beyond that, given the fact that we have such a strong business community, what it means is that much of that $52 billion last year happened on its own steam. Where we have come in as an embassy in a significant way is, one, on the investment side, by working very closely with Abu Dhabi Investment Authority or Mubadala or DP World or IMAR or some of the other big groups, and kind of point them in the right direction and show them about the changes taking place in India that improved ease of doing business and all of those parameters, and connect them with specific states, because at the end of the day, the investor is not going to India, he's going to a particular state and a particular city within that state. And so what's really encouraging for us is the interest that different state governments are showing in terms of attracting investment into their areas, and that competitive federalism that Prime Minister Modi has kind of unleashed over the last 3 or 4 years. And I know that's something that, Arthur, you would have something to say on, because it's also something the states do very effectively in Australia. And I don't know how, Ambassador, it's the case in Mexico.
Thank you. Well, I think that the Ambassador of Australia points a very good item, because the role of the governments is different depending on the relation. Because, for example, Mexico and the UAE, we are so far. So if you take off the embassy, the relation disappears. Because at the beginning of the so far relation, you need, by force, the strong of the governments. Because if you don't have this framework, you can do it anything. So in this case, and for example, Mexico, the UAE, in this step of the relationship, the businessman, by the moment, can go alone. It requires the follow-up, the company of the government in all the levels, even because we are developing our framework, the rules of the investment and the rules of the trade, the certification, the healthy certification. There are a lot of things to solve before the companies have already completed the legal framework. So in the case of Mexico and the UAE, we need the force and the strong and the follow-up of the government. And other point that you mentioned, Ambassador, is the economy diplomacy. In the case of Mexico, it's very difficult to separate which is the political diplomacy and cultural diplomacy and economic diplomacy. In my case, everything is integrated. And you can do a very good cultural event, and you invite all the businessmen, and by the way, the National Day, in most of our case, is supported by the company, and you have the opportunity in the National Day to show the strength of the companies based in this case, in the UAE. So it's a little bit difficult, at least in the case of Mexico and the UAE.
So from the Australian side, the relationship, the economic relationship and the structure, the plan that goes to pursue it pretty much writes itself when you do an analysis of what it is that Australia does and what it is that the UAE needs. The UAE is an arid environment. It grows pretty much no food, and we are an agricultural producer. We need to have an outlet into the region which is safe, where our companies and our people can set up. And so this is the 9th biggest home of Australians here in the world, and we have more companies established here than we do in Indonesia, which is just across the water from us and has a market of 280 million people. We export agriculture here, produce here that could feed the UAE 3 or 4 times over, which proves that we not only export to, but also through the UAE and use it as a hub. We also piggyback on the fact that we have this wonderful linkage in terms of aviation. When you have all of these planes going back and forth, freight is very cheap. And so by definition, we are focusing very heavily on agriculture, and it grows by about 10% a year. Now, that will tell us one of the key areas where we need to focus our economic diplomacy. But the actual trade craft of economic diplomacy and how you do it is actually an entirely different story. For me, it's about getting to know our businesses in the same way that my colleagues get to know their businesses in events like these, to really drill down on what it is that is a block or a problem or something that can change. Is it for us shelf life of our meat? Is that something we need to change? Is that a key indicator or a key blockage? Is it that there is too much administration on this side that increases the cost of our produce and therefore makes it uncompetitive? Is that what we need to do? And then to take those issues to the UAE government and discuss them and see if we can eradicate them. But it's not actually possible without all of you telling each of your representatives what it is that you need, because we ordinarily drive a desk. That's our job. And without you telling us what it is that you need changed, we can't actually have the insight necessarily on what it is we need to do. The final point that I would make is that economic diplomacy is exactly the same at its core as any other type of diplomacy. And basically, we are in a people business. So our business is to get to know people. It's to get to, through that knowledge, convince them of things that will be in the interests of our countries and of you as our businesses, and also in an odd sort of way somehow to personify what is the characteristic of our own country in our own personality. For example, my colleagues are known as being very creative and being very proficient. And when they meet the local government, the personality that they exude, that they put forward, reflects on their countries as being very capable, very proficient, and very creative. And that too is part of diplomacy, to influence and to convince people in the interests of our countries and in your interests.
Now, I should be careful in what I say to my Australian colleague with the cricket series coming up. But just because of that, and because the Australians have been so good at rubbing people across and all that, Arthur, on this matter of flights, have you worked out how many you have on a per square mile of territory basis?
I'm sure there's a way that we can cut it where you will win, I'm sure. I will always talk about the one that's beneficial for us.
Just as an aside. But, on the subject of economic diplomacy, something that the Australians have done particularly well is that several years back, they actually combined their Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Trade into one, which is DFAT, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And that showed the seriousness with which they see trade as part of mainstream diplomatic work. And I think the synergies that you were able to get, it's something that we look at and we kind of yearn for, but the bureaucratic sort of tangle between Ministry of Foreign Affairs in India and the Ministry of Commerce, the divides are so strong, I don't see it happening anytime soon. But what they've been able to do really effectively, and I don't know, it happened in Peter Varghese time or before? Did it happen in Peter Varghese's time or the integration?
It happened in 1987.
1987, yes.
But I was also now deep involved in 2013 in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, then amalgamating still further with our Ministry of Aid, AusAid. And the theory is that if any aspects of public service are pulling in different directions, we have to break those barriers and make sure that they're pulling in the same direction. That doesn't mean, though, just because from the outside it looks like a Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Australia that also has an aid department, that there are not tribes within that ministry, the people who do aid, the people who do trade, and the people who do foreign policy. We all have to become generalists, but people usually have an anchor in a particular skill set.
So before we open up the floor, Ambassador, any last word from you on this?
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to add to the discussion that this is a very difficult, interesting, challenging market. Because as the Ambassador of Australia said, this is a hub. And for example, in the case of Mexico, we're thinking about the UAE, not only by the UAE, because you have access to Indian market, to African market, and here there are a lot of regional companies based here. There are a huge Indian community doing business, and the competition is really very hard. So in my case, as ambassador, I always recommend the Mexican businessman that really they have to be very prepared. This is not could be the first option. They have to be experienced in exportation abroad, because it's very difficult. But if you are based here and you have success, you can do it in everywhere of the world.
My advice to Mexican businessmen is join up with the Indian businessmen.
No, we do business with the Indian businessman. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for that very nice deliberation. Now that we've got the ambassadors coming together at the podium, could we get accountants from Australia, and if there are any in Mexico, together with the Indian accountants to have a seminar like this?
Please invite them. Please invite them. As I said,
Very glad.
Cast the net wider. You will only benefit from the exchange of experiences.
We'd love that.
Yeah, of course, of course.
taking your last year's advice, don't be insular, look out. So the spirit of inclusion of accountants from around the world.
Your Excellency, I'm from Toronto, Canada, and I've got a question for you. Recently, our government concluded a very difficult negotiation with our giant partner south of our border. With our giant partner south of our border, and Her Excellency's country was also involved in it. It was a very difficult negotiation. What is your impression on the diplomatic way it was handled, or could it have been done better or differently? And I would like to listen to Her Excellency's views on that too, because her country was also directly involved. At one stage, there was a divide and rule attempt too. It got too personal.
You know, I would revert to the topic of the discussion, which was the art of diplomacy. And in that art of diplomacy, we are not only reluctant to speak about our work, but on others' work, we are absolutely reluctant to speak. But I'll still, since Mexico is one of the three countries that you're talking about, I'll hand over the floor to the ambassador.
Better you than us.
No, well, the news are in the newspaper. I was only say that Mexico is one of the most open economy in the world. Our recently negotiation with the United States and Canada were very, very hard, but finally we closed the agreement. But all the discussion of the world discussion was focused on the NAFTA, the new NAFTA agreement. But there are in the world a very interesting negotiation, which is TPPC, which is a very huge negotiation in 13 countries, no, Ambassador? And I really invite you to see and to study it and to try to understand this ongoing negotiation, because there is a very good opportunity to cross the trade between Latin American countries, Asia countries, and even Australia countries. So it's a very good framework to doing business. And well, the international context is not now. It's complicated, no? Because you know very well the situation. But there is another options, very interesting, and the TPPC is one of the, in my opinion, one of the most interesting agreements of trade agreements.
Ada, anything from you on Trans-Pacific trade matters?
Well, what I'd say in the broad is that the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a great agreement, and it's a great agreement because we don't have a universal world trade agreement. So when you don't have something that's universal, and when there are different views which stop the conclusion of universal agreements, then the countries that want to work together must come together and create as great a free trade zone, as great a free trade area, and as liberal conditions as we can get by choice. Now, one experience that we have had in Australia, which was initially quite traumatic, but ultimately was very instructive for us, is that in the 80s, we took the decision to drop tariff barriers, and we are currently an economy which is wide open. That resulted in two things. One was a number of inefficient industries were wiped out, and that created some social dislocation. The second thing that happened was that there was a transfer of expertise, energy into industries that were more productive and industries that were more competitive. And today we enjoy a world record 27 years of uninterrupted economic growth, which has never happened before. So one lesson from all of that is not only to have the courage of making the hard decisions, including to join with our colleagues, which is an easier one, and form things like the TPP, but also, if we are still, in Australia's case, enjoying the benefits of significant economic reform from the 1980s, we really cannot sit on our hands and not go on to further economic reform for the next 30 and 40 years, because it really makes a big difference, and the TPP is one of those planks which we hope will get us further economic growth into the future decades.
So let me just say to our Canadian friend, I've followed the whole discussions with great interest. I don't find myself in the position where I should comment on somebody else's affairs. But let me just draw upon my experience in two areas of trade negotiations, or sort of trade negotiations. One, when I was in Australia, and Australia was very, very keen to have an FTA with India. And our government, particularly our Department of Commerce, was dead set against it, because there was a feeling that in a number of areas of core interest to us, agriculture in particular, that Indian farmers simply wouldn't be able to compete with the large-scale agriculture and the heavily mechanized agriculture that Australia has. And so it kind of came down to, at least in terms of our position, okay, you want us to open our market for products, then please open up your market for labor, for example. And of course, that's a non-starter. Here, as an example for those who are interested, we have similar intense discussions on civil aviation. We have 1,060 flights a week, but those of you who have tried to book a seat at the last minute probably know that you can't get one. The flights are full. Most of the flights out of Dubai are operating at 85–90% load factor. Now, Australia has an open skies policy. UAE has an open skies policy. India doesn't. And the choice for us really, for our friends to understand is, should India give its young carriers, Indigo, SpiceJet, Vistara, others, the time and space to grow and develop their capability so that they can become global players in their own right? Or should we right now itself allow them to compete against much, much larger players like Emirates and Etihad with much deeper pockets? The second is, should we agree to a situation where Dubai and perhaps Abu Dhabi become de facto India hubs? Or should we be working to develop Mumbai or Delhi or Hyderabad or Kolkata as our own hubs because of the sheer volume of traffic that India generates? So sometimes elements that look good in economic theory, when you start practicing them, you run into much more complex arguments. Ashish, are we out of time? Yeah, one last question. Okay.
Ambassador, I have one question to the Honorable Australian Ambassador. About nearly 60 years ago, we had an airport here, all sand dunes all around. And when the airport, the planes took off, we played cricket there, because that was the only flat ground. Now, question is this, Ambassador, what is happening to the Australian cricket team now?
Right between the eyes. Well, I'll answer this as a diplomat should. Congratulations to the Indian cricket team for their proficiency, first of all. when the Australian cricket team is not playing well, we need to have a team that is playing well that we can support. Now, what is happening with the Australian cricket team? Two things happened to the Australian cricket team. One was a cultural issue. And culture is a very, very significant thing in any organisation, including a sporting organisation. And without putting too fine a point on it, I would say that the Australian cricket team forgot the culture and the ethics of cricket and only remembered the fact that they were extremely good at winning. But winning without culture, I would say, at a personal level, is not worth it. And I think we saw that. The second thing that we can see in terms of the Australian cricket team is that the players that have come in are extremely young now and not particularly effective, can I say, on the world stage just yet. So please wait. I've met them, they came through, and I have to say that they gave me a great hope for the future because of the ethos and because of the culture that the team imbued. And I said to them this when I addressed them at a function that I had for the Australian cricket team. I reminded them that they were the custodians of something that was very special to Australians and that they didn't own that. We all owned that, and they had no right to do some damage to it, firstly. Secondly, my advice to them was that cricket was the backdrop, the soundtrack on the television as we all grew up in Australia and in India. The last time, you know, Navdeep, I was in Varanasi. We got together in a cafe with some Indian friends over some cricket at the time. And it's the backdrop of all of our childhoods as we grew up. So this was something extremely precious that was more than an individual career. And I think they took it to heart. So I believe that the culture is there, but it will take time for the proficiency now to come in this younger team. But just you wait, we'll be back.
I compliment the ambassador for batting with a very straight bat on that one. Can I, on your behalf, say a big thanks to my wonderful colleagues. Thank you for coming and for sharing your insight. Thank you.
We request, be kindly on the stage, please. May I request Abu Dhabi Chapter Chairman, CA Ashish Bhandari, General Secretary, CA Shilpa Gandhi, and past Chairman, CA B.R. Sudhir, to kindly come on stage and felicitate Her Excellency Francisca Elizabeth Mendes Escobar. May I request CA Ashish Bhandari, Abu Dhabi Chapter Chairman, our Vice Chairman Neeraj Trolia, and the Treasurer, and the past Chairman CA Padmana Acharya, please come forward and felicitate His Excellency Arthur Spiro. May I also request our Chairman Ashish Bhandari, Chapter Treasurer C.A. Sapan Agrawal, and the past Chairman C.A. Suresh Panwar to kindly come on stage and felicitate our Ambassador Navdeep Singh Suri.